true calm does not arrive through control. It appears when we stop forcing life to fit our expectations. It's the softness that enters when we finally allow things to be as they are. Take a deep breath now. Feel the cool air entering, the warmth leaving. Find a position that feels like surrender, your body supported, your hands unclenched, your jaw at rest. The stories you'll hear tonight are not steps to follow. They are quiet companions, sitting beside you as the mind learns to loosen its grip. If you feel called, share what you're feeling in this moment or what you hope these stories might help you release. Maybe a burden, a fear, or simply the need to understand. Let each breath be a gesture of release. There is no race to peace. You are already arriving. Now let the story begin. It was still dark when the monk lit the kitchen fire. Outside, the mountain air clung to the stones like breath not yet exhaled. Frost kissed the corners of the monastery walls, and the wind had not yet stirred the bell. But inside, the kitchen was alive. The tenzo, the head cook, moved with quiet care. He chopped vegetables with reverence, washed rice as though touching the Dharma, boiled water like preparing an offering to the unseen. Not because guests were coming, not because someone was watching, but because every movement was practice. In Zen monasteries, the tenzo is not just a cook. He is a teacher, a practitioner, a guardian of presence. His role is not low, it is sacred, because Zen does not draw lines between spiritual and ordinary. It dissolves them, and what remains is just this moment. And this moment includes rice. The great Zen master Dogen once wrote a full text on this, instructions for the tenzo. He said, "Do not treat cooking lightly. When you cook rice, wash your mind. When you slice roots, cut away delusion." He had learned this lesson young. When Dogen first arrived in China seeking true Dharma, he met an elderly tenzo in a seaside monastery. The man was in his 60s, sun-worn, with sleeves rolled and hands deep in soaking beans. Dogen bowed respectfully. "Venerable one," he said, "why do you, at your age and rank, work in the kitchen?" The old monk looked up and said, "If not me, then who? And if not now, then when?" Dogen offered to help. The tenzo smiled. "Thank you," he said, "but this is my practice." Later that day, Dogen saw the same monk drying mushrooms in the sun. He asked, "Why not do this tomorrow? The sun will rise again." The tenzo simply said, "I do not wait for tomorrow's sun. My life is today." And in that moment, Dogen understood something deeper than scripture. That enlightenment is not found apart from daily life, but within it, in the steam rising from a pot, in the rhythm of chopping, in the patience of stirring porridge without haste. Years later, as a master, Dogen taught his students, when you cook, just cook. Don't think, I am cooking. Don't think, this is just food. Don't think, this is not meditation. Make every motion the expression of the way. In the monastery, the tenzo bows before entering the kitchen. He arranges the knives, washes the board. He does not multitask. He does not rush. When he stirs everything. When he scrubs the pot, he scrubs the self. There is no low task, only low awareness. There is a koan that asks, "What is Buddha?" One master answered, 3 pounds of flax. Another said, the rice cake on the shelf, because Zen knows the sacred hides in plain sight, not above us, not beyond us, but within the ordinary when seen without distraction. In modern life, we resist this. We see chores as interruptions, dishes as delays, errands as obstacles to real practice. But Zen asks, what if the very thing you're avoiding is your path? What if folding laundry is a bow? What if sweeping the floor is a blessing? What if cleaning the toilet is a teaching and letting go? The tenzo is not trying to finish cooking. He is inhabiting it, with full presence, with full breath, with no need for applause, because practice is not what we do on the cushion, it is how we live off it. Dogen wrote, "See with your ears, hear with your eyes, prepare the food with your whole body-mind." Not poetry, not metaphor, instruction to become so present that the boundaries dissolve. To listen to the rice as it boils, to feel the carrot before slicing, to bow to the ladle before lifting it, because when we fully meet a moment, there is no self left to be enlightened. Only the moment, only the rice, only the breath. Once, a student complained, "Master, I have no time for meditation. I spend all day in the kitchen." The master asked, "Do you wash the rice?" "Yes." "Do you chop the greens?" "Yes." "Then why do you call that not meditating?" Commentary. Zen dismantles the hierarchy between sacred and mundane. It reminds us, you don't need incense to wake up. You don't need chants to be present. You need rice and a spoon, and the willingness to give yourself to both without resistance. If you're waiting for your life to get quieter before you practice, you may wait forever. But if you meet this moment, this task, as the way itself, then even the laundry becomes a sutra. Even the shopping list becomes a mantra. Even the broom becomes your teacher. The tenzo is not just feeding bodies, he is cooking truth. And when the pot is washed, the ladle hung, and the kitchen swept, there is nothing left to attain, because it was never somewhere else. It was always here. In the steam, in the stillness, in the rhythm of this one breath, the forest path was dappled with golden light. Shafts of sun fell through the tall teak trees, casting long shadows that shifted with the breeze. A group of monks walked quietly, their feet bare on the earth, their minds turned inward. They had been traveling for 2 days now, through fields, across shallow rivers, under wide skies that watched without comment. And ahead of them, seated on a smooth, flat stone beside a trickling stream, was the Buddha. He was waiting, not impatiently, but as a mountain waits for the wind. The monks approached and bowed. Some sat, others stood, resting their walking sticks against the roots of a banyan tree. One among them, Ananda, had seen something on the road that troubled him. A farmer's son had been bitten by a snake. He had seen the child cry out, flailing in fear and pain. The boy's wound could be treated, but the panic, the despair that had settled in his eyes lingered in Ananda's heart. And so he asked, "Blessed One, why do some suffer more than others, even when the wound is the same?" The Buddha turned to him gently and answered with a story. "Imagine," he said, "a man walking through a quiet field. The day is calm, the air is warm, and then he raised his hand An arrow strikes him. The monk stirred slightly. He gasps in pain. The wound is deep. The arrow has pierced his flesh. He clutches at it. This, Ananda, is the first arrow. He paused. But then, the Buddha's voice softened, deepened. Then the man grows angry. "Why me?" he cries. "What have I done to deserve this?" He curses the heavens. He blames the gods. He weeps not only for the pain, but for the story of the pain. He looked slowly at the circle of listeners. That is the second arrow. Some monks frowned slightly, as if trying to follow an invisible thread. The first arrow, the Buddha said, is the pain we cannot avoid. The body ages. Illness comes. People leave us. We are wounded by life, by loss, by chance. He drew a line in the dirt with his finger. But the second arrow is the one we shoot into ourselves. He tapped his chest lightly, with thought, with resistance, with fear, with story. Ananda nodded slowly. So the suffering comes not only from what happens, he said, but from how the mind meets it. The Buddha smiled. Exactly. A young monk, Rahula, tilted his head. But Lord, if a man is struck by an arrow, how can he not cry out? How can he not fear the pain? The Buddha's gaze was kind. He may cry out, he said, but the wise man does not turn the cry into a prison. He looked at Rahula. You may feel pain, but you do not have to become pain. The wind rustled through the leaves above them, as if nature itself exhaled in agreement. To feel sadness when a friend dies, that is the first arrow. But to say, I will never be whole again, or I should have done more, that is the second. He pointed to the stream beside them. Water flows. It does not cling to a shape. When pain arises, let it arise. See it, feel it, but do not wrap your identity around it. An older monk, who had once been a warrior, bowed his head. I have carried many arrows in my life, he said softly, not in the flesh, but in memory. The Buddha nodded. The past is full of arrows we keep alive with thought. The future is full of arrows we imagine before they are even shot. He looked toward the trees. But the present holds only the first arrow, and even that, when seen clearly, passes. A silence followed, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full. The Buddha let it linger. Then he spoke again. You are not wrong to feel pain. You are not less awakened because you grieve, or ache, or tremble. He gestured to his own chest. This body too has known hunger, illness, sorrow. He placed his hand upon the ground. But when pain comes, I do not build a house around it. I do not say, this is me, this is mine, this is forever. He looked at each monk now, one by one. To awaken is not to avoid arrows. It is to stop shooting the second. Later that evening, as the monks prepared camp near a circle of moss-covered stones, a fire crackled quietly in their midst. Ananda sat with Rahula and the older warrior monk. They said little, but their silence was different now. Not numb, not avoidant, just aware. Rahula watched a moth flutter near the flame and whispered, even the fire burns only what touches it. Ananda smiled. The old monk closed his eyes. And in that moment, the Buddha's words drifted across the darkness like a breeze through tall grass. The first arrow belongs to the world. The second belongs to you. You can choose to set it down. In time, the teaching of the two arrows would find its way into distant lands, distant minds, translated, adapted, retold. Some would call it psychology. Others would call it mindfulness. Some would not give it a name at all. But beneath every version, the truth would remain. Pain is part of life, but suffering is what we build atop it. A story, a wall, a self. But when we learn to pause, to see the first arrow for what it is, and let go of the second dash, then peace returns, quietly, naturally. Like a wound that knows how to heal, the boy stood barefoot in the dust. Beyond the village, where the rice paddies gave way to forest, he searched. The sun hung low, casting long shadows through the bamboo groves. A wind stirred the leaves, but he did not move. His eyes scanned the ground for tracks, for broken twigs, for any sign of the ox. He had lost it, or perhaps he had never truly found it. And so began the journey, not of chasing, but of remembering. In Zen tradition, the oxherding pictures are a series of 10 images, each one a moment in the path toward awakening, not literal, not linear, but true in the way that poetry is true. They begin with a search. A boy looking for an ox. But the ox is not made of flesh. It is the self, the mind, the original nature. The Buddha within, hidden beneath thought, lost in distraction, masked by craving. And the boy, he is all of us. First, searching for the ox, the boy leaves the village. He's tired of ordinary life. He's heard rumors of peace, of awakening, of something real beneath the noise. So he begins to search. He reads sutras, he listens to teachers, he sits in meditation. But his mind is full of fog. Thoughts crowd his vision. Doubt clings like vines. Still, he continues, because something inside him knows there is more than this. 2. Seeing the traces. One morning, while gathering wood, he sees a bent stalk, then a hoof print in the mud. His heart jumps. Maybe I'm close. He kneels, follows the signs. In his practice, he notices moments of stillness. A breath that feels vast. A silence that doesn't feel empty. Just hints, traces, but enough to give him hope. 3. Catching sight of the ox. Suddenly, there it is. A glimpse through the trees. A flash of black hide. A tail flick. The boy freezes. Joy rises. And fear. Because now it's real. Not just a concept. Not just a goal. The ox exists, but it is wild. It does not come when called. And when the boy steps closer, it bolts. 4th, catching the ox. He runs, he sweats, he stumbles. At last, he grabs the rope. The ox bucks, throws its weight against him. It drags him through the grass. But he holds tight. This is the phase of discipline, of hard practice, of struggling with the mind that wants to flee. It takes effort, structure, ritual. Again and again he pulls the ox back, until finally it yields. Not because it is broken, but because it begins to trust. 5. Taming the ox. Now he walks beside it, still holding the rope but not fighting. He brushes its coat, feeds it grain. They sit together beneath a tree. This is calm abiding. Meditation deepens. The mind, once unruly, now rests beside him like a friend. Joy rises, not from excitement, but from peace. 6. Riding the ox home. The boy climbs on its back. He plays the flute as they travel. There's laughter now. The ox no longer resists. They are one motion, one rhythm, the self and the selfless walking home together. Some think this is the end, but it is not. There is more, always more. 7. The ox transcended. One morning, he wakes, and the ox is gone. Not lost, gone, dissolved. Because there was never a separate ox. Only the illusion of separation. There is no one taming another. No duality. Only being, only suchness. The boy sits in silence, and everything is enough. 8. Both ox and self-forgotten. Now, not even the boy remains. No watcher, no watched. Just sky, wind, movement without mover, compassion without identity, peace without object. This is awakening. Not a peak to climb, but a dissolving of the climber. 9. Returning to the source. But even this is not the end. He returns to the world, to the place he left behind. The village, the noise, the errands. He no longer seeks to escape it. Because the sacred is here too. In the washing of bowls, in the crying of babies, in the marketplace and the broom. 10th, entering the marketplace with open hands. He walks through the village, dirty feet, laughing eyes, no halo, no robe. Just a man carrying firewood and smiling at children. He does not preach, does not speak of truth. He simply helps, lends a hand, bows to beggars, listens without interrupting, because he carries nothing and gives everything. Commentary: the oxherding. Pictures are not a ladder, they are a mirror. We move forward, then fall back, then forward again. Sometimes we glimpse the ox for a moment, then lose it for years. And that's okay, because the journey is not about getting somewhere. It's about seeing clearly where we are. The boy is not special. He is not a saint. He is you. Waking up slowly, letting go gently, returning home freely, and realizing it was never the ox that was missing, only the one who thought it was separate. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. In the heart of the city of Vaishali, not far from the clamor of markets and the perfume of jasmine, there lived a man unlike any other. He was wealthy, yes. His robes dyed in saffron and silk. His estate wide as a lake. He was respected, known to governors and scholars alike. He was a householder, a father, a merchant. But more than that, he was awake. His name was Vimalakirti. Unlike the monks, he did not wear simple robes. Unlike the ascetics, he did not live in the forest. He lived in the world, but not of it. He walked through noise with the silent mind. He moved through illusion without being caught. And so his teachings were sharper than sermons. His presence, more disruptive than thunder. One day, it was said that Vimalakirti had fallen ill, not from weakness, but from compassion. He had taken on the sickness of the world so others might awaken. Word reached the Buddha and his disciples, so the Buddha asked, "Who will go and visit the ailing Vimalakirti?" One by one, the great disciples declined. Shariputra, Maudgalyayana, Ananda. Each said, "Master, I cannot. I have debated Vimalakirti before, and I was humbled." Because this layman, this non-monk, non-official, had a clarity that even the great arhats could not match. His words undid your logic. His questions pierced through pride. He was kind, but unshakably sharp. At last the Buddha turned to Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, and Manjushri, without hesitation, said, "I will go." So Manjushri entered the city, accompanied by heavenly beings, monks, and devas. He found Vimalakirti reclining on a simple bed beneath a flowering tree. His eyes were calm, his illness invisible, his presence unmistakable. Manjushri bowed. "Venerable one," he said, "how should a bodhisattva view the world?" A simple question. And Vimalakirti answered not with poetry, but with paradox. A bodhisattva views the world as a magician views an illusion, as a dream, as a mirage, as a bubble on water. Manjushri asked again, "What is the root of this illness?" Vimalakirti replied, "The root of my sickness is the sickness of all beings. When they are healed, I will be healed too." And then he began to teach, not with lectures, but with reversals. He said a bodhisattva must live in the world without being trapped by it, must speak without attachment to words, must enter duality in order to transcend it. His home became a Dharma hall, his bed a throne of emptiness. Then came the final deepest question. Manjushri asked, "What is the ultimate teaching of non-duality?" One by one, the assembled bodhisattvas gave answers, each profound, each poetic. They spoke of emptiness, of no birth and no death, of neither here nor there, of neither self nor other. Each spoke in turn, until all had spoken. Then they turned to Vimalakirti and asked, "What is your answer?" Vimalakirti looked at them, smiled, and said, "Nothing." He remained completely silent. No gesture, no word, just presence. And in that moment, the hall fell still. Even the wind paused at the edge of the window. And the bodhisattvas understood, because that, his silence, was the answer. Beyond yes and no, beyond concepts, beyond even the word beyond. Only direct knowing, unspoken and complete. Commentary. The Vimalakirti Sutra is not just a scripture, it is a mirror, held up to the part of us that clings to roles, to robes, to rank, to rhetoric. It reminds us, wisdom is not a matter of appearance, and truth is not always spoken. Vimalakirti was not a monk, but he understood Dharma more deeply than most. He owned property, but was not owned by it. He lived among crowds, but dwelled in emptiness. He used language, but was not trapped by it. And when the time came to speak of non-duality, he let silence do the speaking. Sometimes, silence is escape. But sometimes, it is clarity. not a refusal, but a revelation. A silence so full, it says everything. There's a Zen saying, "When the mouth is closed, the Dharma speaks most clearly." This is what Vimalakirti embodied, the wordless transmission, the truth beyond fingers pointing to moons. In our world, we often rush to speak, to fill the space, to define, to prove. But Vimalakirti teaches, when we stop grasping, when we stop arranging words like armor, what remains is presence. The silence was not empty, it was alive. It was not passive, it was the roar of no self. It dismantled even the idea of someone giving an answer, and left only this. You don't have to be a monk to wake up. You don't have to renounce your life. You have to see through it, and then live with depth, with clarity, with compassion, from within the illusion, while no longer fooled by it. Vimalakirti's room is still here. Every moment you stop trying to win the argument, every time you stop needing to prove you're wise, every time you rest in the space before thought, you are sitting beside him, and you are silent too. In the town of Rajagaha, nestled among ridges of stone and mist, the streets curled like vines through hills and markets. Every morning, as the sun brushed gold across tiled rooftops, the air came alive with the calls of merchants, the ring of temple bells, and the mingling scents of tamarind, burning incense, and warm sweet rice. Life here was orderly, rhythmic, a blend of mountain silence and city song. But lately, that rhythm had broken, not from plague, not from drought, but from something deeper, more primal. Fear, not fear of armies or kings, but of a creature, Nalagiri, a bull elephant so massive that earth seemed to lean under his step. Captured from the wild mountains of the north, Nalagiri had been kept in the royal stables since he was young. Once a proud spirit, free to roam cliffs and bathe in wild rivers, now he was shackled day after day, year after year. The weight of captivity grew inside him like fire trapped in stone. He grew restless, then bitter, then dangerous. Stable boys quit, guards were replaced, chains grew thicker. Nalagiri's cries echoed through the stone halls like thunder rolling through empty skies. The people of Rajagaha whispered that madness had taken him, but not all feared him. One man saw an opportunity in that rage. Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin, a monk by appearance, but a storm beneath the robes. Jealous of the Buddha's calm, his followers, his truth, Devadatta sought power, not peace. And when his teachings could not rival the Buddha's, he plotted instead. He went to King Ajatashatru, young and proud, his rule still soft around the edges, and he leaned close. "Let Nalagiri loose," he whispered. "Aim him at the Buddha. See what becomes of silent wisdom when tusks meet flesh." The king, tempted by spectacle or swayed by flattery, agreed. And so, one morning, before the city had fully woken, the iron gate to Nalagiri's pen creaked open. Chains were undone. Commands were given. The path was cleared. Nalagiri stepped forward, eyes wide, breath steaming, mind ablaze. He charged through market streets, through cloth stalls and fruit carts, scattering baskets and lives. People screamed, children ran, dogs howled and carts overturned. He did not walk. He tore the world open beneath him, And down that path, barefoot, cloaked in saffron robes, carrying only his alms bowl, walked the Buddha. No guards, no weapons, no rush in his step, just presence. His disciples shouted from behind walls and corners, "Lord, turn back, the elephant comes, he will crush you." But the Buddha kept walking, not with recklessness, not with pride, but with compassion so still it could hold a mountain. As Nalagiri approached, the air thickened with heat and tension. His tusks gleamed, his trunk coiled like a whip. His roar shattered the morning hush. Mothers shielded their children, merchants fell to the ground. The entire city held its breath, but the Buddha stood. The elephant thundered toward him. The ground trembled, and then stillness. The Buddha raised his eyes and looked. He looked not at a beast, not at a weapon, but at a being in pain. He saw the chains, the years, the sorrow turned to rage. He saw the hunger for freedom twisted into madness. He saw a heart once wild, now broken by cruelty. And in his gaze, he held no fear, no judgment, only recognition. As Nalagiri neared, mere strides away from trampling the man before him, he met that gaze, and something changed. The wind quieted, the air cooled. The fire in Nalagiri's eyes flickered. He slowed, then paused. His ears twitched, his breathing hitched. He took one more step, then stopped. The Buddha stepped forward. Slowly, gently, one hand raised, not to strike, not to shield, but to bless. And Nalagiri knelt. He folded his legs beneath him, lowered his head like a branch under rain. A great groan, half sigh, half sorrow, escaped his chest. And there, in the middle of the street where rage had once ruled, the Buddha placed his hand on Nalagiri's brow. Not with domination, but with presence. And the elephant wept. Tears pooled beneath his eyes, streaking down the folds of his face, darkening the dust. His trunk coiled softly around the Buddha's arm, no longer as a weapon, but as a gesture of surrender. The city watched in stunned silence. The same elephant who shattered stone fences and snapped trees now sat like a disciple at the feet of peace. Devadatta, watching from the shadows of a colonnade, said nothing. His plot, like a snake uncoiled, had slithered away, not with defeat by force, but by a truth too gentle to resist. Later, when the sun rose fully and the city slowly exhaled, Nalagiri returned to the royal grounds, but no longer was he led by whip or chain. He walked slowly, willingly, like a monk returning from alms. The Buddha returned to his seat beneath a banyan tree, his bowl untouched, his robe still bright. And the people came. They came not to celebrate a miracle, but to understand a lesson. They asked, "How did you stop him?" And the Buddha replied, "Anger cannot be conquered by anger, but by love alone. Fear cannot be silenced by force, but by understanding. The wildness in others is often the cry of suffering, not wickedness." And so it was taught that true strength is not in the fist, not in the sword, but in the heart that stays open in the face of danger. The tale of Nalagiri passed from lips to scrolls, from scrolls to temples, from temples to time itself. Children would ask their mothers, "Is it true that the Buddha tamed the elephant?" And they would answer, "Yes, my child, but not with magic, with seeing. Seeing the pain in others, seeing the fear beneath fury, seeing the being behind the mask, and meeting it with love." Nalagiri lived out his days not as a beast of burden, but as a gentle giant, offering rides to children, watering temple gardens with his trunk, and standing calmly when the monks recited sutras beneath the trees. It is said that when he died, the earth grieved gently, and his spirit rose unchained. Some believe Nalagiri was reborn in a heavenly realm. Others say he was reborn among the disciples. But all agree on this, that in the still gaze of one awakened man, an ocean of rage was calmed. Not by war, but by peace itself. She had heard hundreds of stories, pain layered on pain, grief knotted with shame, rage disguised as silence. Dr. Anjali Mehta was a seasoned therapist, 47 years old, calm voice, warm eyes, a room filled with soft lamps, quiet bookshelves, and a single blue armchair that caught the afternoon light just so. She had learned over time that her work was not to fix people, but to witness them, to hold space, to wait, to not flinch when the truth arrived. That afternoon, her 2 p.m. client sat stiffly, teenage boy, 17. Sleeves pulled over his hands, a stare that hovered somewhere behind her shoulder. He didn't speak for the first 8 minutes. She didn't force it. She just sat, breathing gently, grounded, present. When he finally did speak, it was one sentence. "Everyone talks like they know what I'm feeling. They don't." She didn't nod too quickly, didn't say, "I understand." Instead, she let silence do what words often can't. "There's a saying in Zen," she offered softly, "that the teacher is like a mirror. They don't speak for you. They just show you where the dust has gathered." The boy blinked, looked at her, and, for the first time in weeks, said something more. There is a deep wisdom in the pause, the moment between a question and an answer, the breath between emotion and reaction, the silence that honors pain without trying to patch it. Anjali once had a mentor who said, "You don't need the right words, you need the right presence." She had taken that to heart. Her patients didn't always thank her, didn't always improve quickly, but many came back. Because there aren't many places in the world where someone will sit with your brokenness without trying to sweep it away. She remembered an older woman once, widowed after 42 years. The woman cried for 45 minutes straight. Anjali didn't interrupt, didn't analyze, just handed her a tissue and stayed. At the end of the session, the woman whispered, "You're the only person who didn't tell me to be strong." Anjali said nothing, but later she wept, not from sadness, but from the honor of witnessing someone's unguarded truth. Therapists are trained to listen, but Anjali had learned to listen beneath the words, the tightening of a jaw, the hesitation before a name, the breath that catches after, "I'm fine." Sometimes her job wasn't to provide answers. It was to be the room where the storm could pass. She had a small bell on her desk, never rang it, just kept it there to remind herself, return to this moment, over and over. One evening, after a long day, she wrote in her journal, "People come in with tangled lives. I don't untangle them, I just hold the threads. until they can begin to see the pattern. The boy in the blue hoodie came back the next week, and the next. He still didn't say much, but he sat and listened, and didn't flinch when she said his name. It was a start. And sometimes that is enough. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. The temple's library held thousands of texts, worn scrolls, faded sutras, ink-smudged commentaries written by hands long returned to dust. Monks came to read by daylight when the sun filtered through paper screens, and the scent of old parchment warmed the air. But one monk always came at night. Her name was May. She was quiet, thoughtful, the kind who listened longer than she spoke. Each evening, after her chores were done, she would carry a single candle into the library and read until wax melted low. One night during the rainy season, the wind howled across the hillside. Storm clouds swallowed the moon. Still, May entered the library, lit her candle, sat cross-legged before a scroll on emptiness. The flame flickered with every gust, but she kept reading. Outside, an owl perched in the eaves, white-feathered, wide-eyed. Still, it watched her, unblinking. As the wind swirled harder, the flame bent. Then, it went out. Darkness, total. May did not panic. She closed her eyes and waited. After a moment, she noticed a soft rustling overhead, feathers, then stillness again. She opened her eyes, and though she could see nothing, she sensed the owl was still there. Watching, she whispered aloud, "How do you see in this?" As if in answer, a line from the sutra she had just read returned to her. "The eye that sees true is not of flesh or flame, but of calm presence in the dark." She smiled softly. Perhaps the lesson wasn't in the candlelight, but in its absence. The next day, she spoke with the abbot. "Master," she asked, "why do we fear the dark so much?" He thought for a while. "Because we trust only what the eye can see. But true wisdom," he said, "often waits in the dark." He continued, "The owl does not light a lantern. It simply sees." From that night on, May still brought her candle, but she also learned to sit after it burned out, not to read, but to observe her breath, her thoughts, her discomfort. And slowly the dark became a teacher. Other monks noticed. May was calmer, slower to speak, gentler when correcting mistakes, as if she no longer needed light to know what mattered. One night, a novice joined her. He fidgeted, grumbled at the dark. "I can't see anything," he said. May smiled. "That's the beginning," she said, "not the problem." There's a Zen saying, "Don't curse the dark, don't worship the light, become the eye that sees in both." The owl never flew down, never made a sound, but its lesson stayed with May until the end of her days. Sometimes, the truest clarity isn't found by shining more light, but by learning to sit still when the candle goes out. The forest welcomed him, but not with comfort. It offered no shade from questions, no warmth from familiarity. Siddhartha had left behind the silk and gold of palace life, and now walked among wandering seekers, mendicants, and sages whose ribs showed like cages, and whose eyes glimmered with discipline or delusion. He sought teachers, and they welcomed him, for his mind was sharp and his determination pure. He studied with Arada Kalama, who taught of the formless meditative realms, places where consciousness floated like light on still water. Siddhartha followed his teachings, and with silent breath and sharpened focus, he reached those plains. His mind became spacious. His thoughts slowed like clouds drifting across a still lake. For hours, even days, he remained in deep absorption, untouched by fear, untouched by want. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the truth. Though his body was still, suffering had not ended. The world remained the same. Hunger still visited the poor. Age still bent the backs of farmers. Death still came to children and kings alike. He bowed to Arada Kalama with gratitude and moved on. Next, he studied with Udaka Ramaputta, who taught of neither perception nor non-perception, of the vast nothingness that lay beyond all forms. Siddhartha once again followed, and again he reached the heights. He learned to let go of sensation, of even the thought of self. He floated, as if beyond the skin of the world. But again, when his eyes opened, the truth remained. Desire still lingered. Aging still came. Death still waited. He thanked his teachers, bowed with reverence, and walked on. He had reached the highest peaks of mind. He had sat in the palace of consciousness. And still, he had not seen freedom. In a grove beside the Niranjana river, he found a band of 5 ascetics who practiced fierce austerity. They believed that the body must be conquered by pain, that by starving it, punishing it, mastering its cravings, one could burn away desire and illusion. Siddhartha joined them. He ate but 1 grain of rice a day. He chewed each grain for long minutes until it dissolved like a breath. He slept in the open, through storm and frost, curled against the roots of trees, his robe no thicker than air. He held his breath until his vision blurred and his head rang with wind. His limbs withered. His skin clung to his bones like silk over stone. His hair fell in clumps, and birds perched near him, thinking him a branch. He listened only to silence. He welcomed pain. He thought it would purify him, but the fire of truth did not rise. He could silence the body. He could silence even the mind, but the ache remained. The ache that asked, why do we suffer? Why do we cling? What ends the endless turning of sorrow? One day, as he bathed in the river, he collapsed from weakness. The water barely reached his knees, yet his strength failed him. His vision dimmed. The world tilted. A young girl named Sujata saw him and, moved by compassion, offered him a bowl of rice milk. Her hands trembled as she knelt before him, unsure if he was a spirit or a dying man. The milk was warm, the grains soft. As it passed his lips, his body stirred, not with indulgence, but with remembrance. The body was not the enemy, nor was the world. In that moment, clarity dawned. This was not failure, this was insight. Neither indulgence in luxury, nor torment of the flesh had freed him. He had lived both extremes. He had walked both shores, and both had kept him bound. He would walk the middle way, not soft and yielding, nor rigid and cruel, not drowned in pleasure, nor crushed by pain, but steady, balanced, awake. He stood and walked back to the grove. The 5 ascetics saw the softness in his step, the color in his cheeks, and they scorned him. He has abandoned the path, they whispered. He has turned back to comfort. But Siddhartha knew better. He did not argue. He did not explain. He simply bowed and walked on. At the edge of the forest stood a great fig tree whose roots plunged deep and whose branches reached like arms toward the sky. Siddhartha looked upon it and knew, here he would sit, here he would wait. He gathered dry grass for a seat. He placed his back to the tree. He crossed his legs, rested his hands in his lap, and drew a deep, even breath. He made a vow, though my skin withers, though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I find the end of suffering. The sun passed. The moon rose. Birds quieted. Winds stilled. And in the silence the battle began, not with sword or shield, but with doubt and memory, fear and illusion. But that was the next story. For now he sat, still, the seeker who had tasted every path, now ready to look within. The next chapter had begun, the monsoon rains had passed, and the forest paths of Kosambi steamed with quiet life. Leaves dripped with silver beads, frogs croaked low from the shadows, and above it all, the scent of wet bark and jasmine lingered like breath held too long. Under a canopy of tall sal trees, the Buddha sat surrounded by monks. They had walked for days to gather here. Some were old, most were young, their robes still crisp from devotion, their minds still sharp with questions. And today, the Blessed One had agreed to speak, not of morality, nor of meditation, but of something far subtler, of misunderstanding. He began, not with pronouncement, but with silence. Then, as the breeze shifted through the trees, he spoke. There are those, he said, who come to the Dharma like a man searching for a serpent. A few monks glanced up. Serpents were no small matter in these woods, slender and swift, some deadly, some divine. This man, the Buddha continued, is told that a snake dwells near the roots of a great tree, so he goes into the forest to catch it. But he does not learn the proper way. He does not bring a forked stick. He does not wait for the right moment. He sees movement in the grass and lunges with bare hands. A few younger monks leaned forward. What happens? One whispered. The Buddha's gaze passed over them like moonlight on water. He seizes the snake by the tail. A ripple of discomfort passed through the listeners. And the snake, he said, twists and strikes. He paused. And so it is with those who take hold of the Dharma wrongly, grasping at the tail, not understanding the nature of what they hold. And when it turns against them, they blame the teaching, never seeing that it was their own hand that erred. Silence fell again. It was not a parable to soothe, but to stir. For many in that circle had studied hard, memorized discourses, debated with pride. They recited verses in the marketplace, corrected others in the villages, and took satisfaction in knowing the words of the Buddha by heart. But the words were not the snake, and the Buddha knew it. A senior monk, Kakana, bowed his head and asked softly, "Blessed One, how does one hold the Dharma correctly?" The Buddha nodded. Imagine, he said, a man crossing a river. The current is swift, the far bank promises safety, and he finds no boat, no bridge, so he gathers branches, grass and reeds. He binds them tightly. He makes a raft. The monks followed, some nodding. With effort, he crosses the water. And when he reaches the other shore, does he carry the raft on his back for the rest of the journey? A few smiled. A few looked unsure. No, said the Buddha. He leaves it behind, grateful, respectful, but he does not cling to it. He let that image hang in the warm, moist air. So too is the Dharma, he said, a raft to cross, not a burden to bear forever, not a weapon to strike others, not a badge to wear. A soft murmur of recognition passed through the monks. But some, he continued, treat the Dharma as the man who grabs the snake's tail. They take hold of words, of verses, of rules, not to cross the river, but to shout from the shore. He turned his palm upward. They say, I know, you do not. They say, this is the only way, yours is wrong. They say, I have read, I have memorized, I have mastered. He paused. But what have they understood? A breeze stirred the forest floor. A leaf spiraled down like a question with no answer. Understanding, he said, is not repetition. Wisdom is not memorization, and truth is not a prize to be clutched. He looked at them all. Do not seize the tail. Learn how the snake moves. Watch, be still, approach with care. Grasp rightly, not to own, but to understand. A young novice, no older than 15, raised his hand timidly. But blessed one, he said, what if one clings to the raft out of reverence? Out of gratitude? The Buddha smiled gently. Reverence is not the same as attachment, he said. Gratitude flows like a river. Clinging dams the stream. He folded his hands in his lap. To let go does not mean to forget. It means to honor the purpose and move on when it has been fulfilled. Several monks bowed. Some looked thoughtful, others uneasy, for the teaching had pierced the pride of many. A monk named Sati, known for his keen memory and rigid interpretations, frowned. But Lord, he said, should we not defend the Dharma from false views? Yes, said the Buddha without hesitation. But first, defend it from misunderstanding within yourself. A man who argues from ego may win the debate and lose the path. He looked directly at Sati. If you know a verse, but use it to shame another, you have caught the tail. He turned to the group once more. If you teach to elevate yourself, you have caught the tail. If you study only to be praised, you have caught the tail. If you hold to rules to feel superior, you have caught the tail. And if you mistake knowledge for wisdom, you have caught the tail. The forest was utterly still now. Even the birds had quieted. And when the snake turns and bites, the Buddha asked, you will say the Dharma is false, that it failed you, that it was sharp, cruel, or useless, but the snake was never to blame. A few monks bowed their heads in shame. One of the older mendicants, seated on a mat of grass near the front, exhaled deeply. I have clutched many tails in my time, he said, but now I wish only to learn how to see clearly. The Buddha nodded. That is the beginning of wisdom. That evening, as twilight turned the forest gold, the monks moved quietly through the camp. No chants, no debates, just footsteps and thought. Sati sat alone by the fire, his manuscript scrolls untouched. The novice who had asked about the raft sat beside him, quiet, respectful. Sati turned and whispered, "I used to think that knowing every word would make me wise." The boy looked at him. "And now?" Sati stared at the flames. "Now I wonder if I even know how to listen." In the stillness of the forest, the words of the Buddha echoed like a distant bell. "Do not grasp the tail, learn how the snake moves." And in the hearts of those who truly listened, the Dharma shed its scales of pride, of certainty, of rigid form, and began, at last, to breathe. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. Long ago, in a kingdom ringed by mountains and temples, a mighty king ruled from a palace of stone and gold. He was feared by his enemies, praised by poets, and followed by thousands. His armies stretched across the land. His wealth filled entire chambers, and his commands echoed through cities like thunder. But still, he was restless. Victory brought no peace. Praise faded quickly. Even sleep, wrapped in silk and guarded by soldiers, felt hollow. And so one morning, while gazing out across his kingdom from a marble balcony, the king spoke aloud. "Who in this world is greater than I?" A servant, sweeping quietly nearby, paused. "There is one," he said softly, eyes downcast. The king turned sharply. "Who?" "A sage," said the servant. "He lives alone in the forest, wears no crown, owns no gold. But they say he holds more peace in his silence than all your generals in battle." The king laughed. "A beggar in the woods, greater than me." But something in the servant's voice lingered. And later that night, when the court had gone quiet, the king summoned his best horse and rode out alone, disguised in simple robes, his face shadowed by the hood of a traveler. He rode for 2 days, through thick jungle, across rivers, past farmers and monks and children who did not bow. Finally, at the edge of a still grove, he saw a small hut beneath a Bodhi tree, and outside it, seated cross-legged on a flat stone, was the sage. No guards, no roof over his head, no possessions. Just stillness, and eyes that did not flicker when the king approached. "You are the one they speak of?" the king asked. The sage nodded once. "I am one, of many." The king studied him. "You have no palace, no army, no throne, and yet people speak your name in reverence. Why?" The sage said nothing. The silence stretched, long enough for the king to feel his own voice echo. Finally, the sage opened his palm and motioned for the king to sit. The king hesitated, then obeyed. They sat together under the tree, as the wind moved gently through the leaves. No words, no commands, just presence. After a long while, the king said, "You are not afraid of me." "I see no king," said the sage, "only a man with questions." The king frowned. "I have conquered lands, broken enemies, shaped history. You think I have questions?" The sage met his eyes. "Then why are you here?" The king opened his mouth, closed it, and looked away. Because beneath the silk, beneath the crowns, beneath the noise, he had come not to test the sage, but to understand something he could not command. Finally, he asked, "Why do people follow you?" "I do not ask them to." "Then why do they listen?" The sage picked up a small stone from the earth, rolled it in his fingers. "They listen," he said, "because I have no need for them to." The king blinked. "I lead armies, command cities, hold power over life and death, but still I'm not content." The sage nodded. "Because you mistake fear for respect, obedience for love, wealth for worth." The king stiffened. "Are you saying I am not powerful?" "I am saying," the sage said gently, "that true power does not cling, it does not shout, it does not fear being forgotten." They sat again in silence. The wind stirred the sage's robe. The king looked down at his hands. "I have everything," he said, "but still I feel empty." The sage smiled. "Then you are ready." "Ready for what?" "To lead without needing to be above." That evening, the king returned to his palace. No fanfare, no declaration, but something had changed. He began to listen more, to speak less, to ask questions instead of giving orders. His advisors whispered about his visits to temples, his long walks alone, his sudden interest in sitting beneath trees without speaking. And when his generals asked, "Who taught you this?" he said simply, "A man with nothing, who showed me everything." Years later, when the sage passed into silence beneath the same Bodhi tree, the king declared a day of stillness across the land. No work, no speech, just listening. And in time, his own rule became a story of its own, not because he expanded borders, but because he stopped needing to, not because he gained more, but because he learned to let go. And the story of the king and the sage spread like the breeze that once moved through the forest leaves. A reminder that the crown is not the source of power, wisdom is, and the one who does not seek to rule is often the one most worthy to lead. It was night when the master pointed. The moon hung low over the monastery roof, pale and full, casting silver light across the silent garden. A group of monks stood beside him, robes drawn tight against the wind. The master raised his hand and extended one finger toward the sky. "See that?" he said. The students nodded. "The moon." He shook his head. "Number that is the finger." Then he smiled softly. "And what it points to is the moon." The monks stood still, unsure. The wind moved the trees. The master lowered his hand and whispered, "Don't mistake the finger for the moon." This is one of the most repeated teachings in Zen, because the mind is hungry for signs, hungry for symbols, hungry for teachers, for teachings, for shapes and systems. It sees the finger and calls it truth, but the finger is just pointing. It is not the truth itself. Imagine you're lost in the forest. A guide lifts a lantern. You follow the light, but mistake the lantern for the destination. You begin polishing it, worshipping it, writing poems about its handle and flame. But you never leave the forest, because the lantern was not meant to be your home. It was meant to show you the path. That's what Zen does. It points, but if you hold too tightly to the pointing, you never arrive. Buddha's words, the sutras, the rituals, even meditation, They are fingers, beautiful, wise, luminous fingers. But if you cling to them, if you name them truth, you stop short of the moon. A monk once asked his teacher, "What is the nature of ultimate reality?" The teacher held up a flower, just a flower. The monk bowed. He understood, because the flower was not the answer. It was the invitation to stop asking, to just see, to be. There's a story of a man crossing a river. The bridge is narrow, the current strong. Halfway across, he freezes, looks down at the water and panics. He shouts to a traveler behind him, "Help me understand this bridge." The traveler laughs gently. "You don't need to understand it," he says. "Just walk." Zen does not fear the unknown. It welcomes it, because the unknown is where truth lives. Not in definitions, but in direct experience. Not in the finger, but in the sky beyond it. Many people come to Zen hoping for words that explain. But the moment something is explained, it is no longer what it was. It becomes a concept, a mental model, and reality, true, breathing, silent reality, evaporates behind the map. Once, a young monk read every sutra he could find. He could recite the Eightfold Path, the 5 aggregates, the 4 noble truths. He knew Sanskrit terms. He quoted the Buddha with reverence. But he was restless. He asked his teacher, "Why do I still feel distant from awakening?" The teacher smiled and walked him outside. The moon was rising. The teacher pointed. The student followed the finger. "See it?" the teacher asked. "Yes," the monk said. "The moon." The teacher chuckled. "Number, that's still my finger." The monk blinked, and then, like a soft breeze over water, he understood. To point is not to possess. To teach is not to trap. Even the Buddha said, "My teachings are like a raft, meant to cross the river, not to carry on your back once you reach the shore." But many cling to the raft. They decorate it, argue over whose raft is best, then forget to cross. The finger and the moon, words and truth, map and terrain. All teachings are like this. Zen does not dismiss the finger, but it urges you not to stop there. Because no teacher can give you the moon. They can only point. The rest is silence, attention, direct seeing, commentary. This koan is not just about Zen. It is about how we relate to everything. A lover says, "I love you," and we cling to the phrase, replaying it in our minds. But the real love was in the look, in the moment, in the breath before the words. The words were the finger, the love was the moon. We read books about mindfulness, but forget to be mindful. We quote wise sayings, but live unawake. We chase spiritual techniques, but miss the moment itself. The way the light falls through leaves, the sound of tea being poured, the feel of wind on bare skin. These are the moon, director, immediate, alive. When you sit in meditation, thoughts will rise. Names, labels, questions. That's the finger, let it point. But keep looking beyond, to what has no name, no answer, only presence, only this, only now. If you walk away with only the finger, you miss everything. But if you let it lead you, quietly, gently, without clinging, you may one day look up and find yourself under the full moon, smiling, and no longer needing to explain why. In a mountainside monastery carved from stone and silence, there lived a monk known for his rage. He was not a novice, not undisciplined, not cruel, but when the fire came, it came fast, like wind through dry leaves, like lightning on still water. His name was Anjan. Years before, he had left behind a life of status and noise. A wealthy merchant's son, he had walked away from gold, from servants, from praise. He shaved his head, took the robe, entered the path, and tried to be still. But stillness did not come easily. Not for him. While other monks sat like stones in meditation, Anjan's thoughts raced. While others bowed gently in morning light, his mind bristled at small slights, careless words, slow movements. He clenched his teeth, gripped his mala beads too tightly, snapped at those who asked too many questions, and always afterward, he regretted it. One morning, a young monk accidentally spilled tea on his robes. Anjan stood. His voice rose like thunder in the sacred hall. "You call this mindfulness?" The novice bowed deeply, trembling, but the damage had been done. Silence followed, heavy and sharp. That evening, the abbot summoned Anjan. He did not scold, did not instruct. He simply handed Anjan a small, empty bowl. "Hold this," he said, and walk to the old pine tree at the edge of the cliff. Sit there until the bowl is full. Anjan blinked. "The bowl is empty." The abbot nodded. "Fill it with stillness." So Anjan went. The pine tree stood crooked against the sky, its needles sharp as whispers, its trunk weathered by time. Anjan sat beneath it, bowl in lap, confusion in heart. How could he fill a bowl with something that couldn't be seen? Hours passed. Birds called. Clouds shifted. His legs ached. Still the bowl remained, empty. Still his thoughts churned. "This is foolish. I should be studying. They're laughing at me back at the monastery." The fire stirred again, that old familiar heat. He stood up, ready to leave, but paused, and for the first time, he looked. At the bowl, at the tree, at the sky opening quietly beyond the cliffs, and something softened, not a release, but a noticing that his mind was loud and the world was not. He sat again, not to succeed, not to prove, but just to be. Days passed. He returned each morning, sometimes with anger, sometimes with peace, sometimes with tears, always with the bowl. He began to notice his breath. Not control it, just notice. He began to feel his thoughts, not as commands, but as weather. They came, they went. One day, a beetle crawled across the bowl's rim. Anjan did not flinch, did not swat it away. He watched it, felt its tiny weight, its gentle effort, and whispered, "Thank you." Weeks later, he returned to the abbot. The bowl was still empty, but his eyes were not. They were clear, software still. The abbot smiled. "Did you bring what I asked for?" Anjan bowed. "I did not fill the bowl with stillness, but I emptied it of everything else." This is the story of the angry monk, and how fire, when met with space, becomes warmth. Commentary. Anger is not evil. It is energy. It is fire. And fire can cook food or burn down temples. The Dharma does not teach suppression. It teaches transformation. Anjan did not erase his anger. He sat with it. He saw its roots: fear, pride, expectation, and in seeing it clearly, he softened. You cannot calm your mind by force. You cannot force a bowl to fill with stillness. You can only stop stirring the water and wait until clarity returns on its own. We all carry bowls, and we all try to fill them with achievement, with reaction, with rightness, with control, but the wisest among us know. The real work is emptying, not to lose, but to make space. There's a Zen saying, let go or be dragged. You don't have to destroy your fire. Just give it space. Let it breathe. Let it teach you what stillness really means. And remember, stillness does not mean absence of movement. It means absence of resistance. Like a tree that sways but does not break. Like a bowl that reflects the sky because it does not try to. Let your bowl be empty, and in that emptiness, find peace. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. A novice had a restless mind. He tried to sit, tried to breathe, tried to still the thoughts, but each time he closed his eyes, his mind swirled. Lists, regrets, what ifs, what nexts. He couldn't find peace, and the more he tried to force stillness, the louder everything seemed to become. One morning, after failing again to meditate, he stood up in frustration. I'm broken, he muttered. And he walked, head down, steps fast, until he nearly collided with the old groundskeeper, Master Rio. Rio was known for his silence. He didn't teach. He didn't lecture. He just tended the gardens and cleaned the gutters. But he had been at the temple longer than anyone. The novice bowed clumsily. Forgive me, Master. Rio tilted his head, studying him. You're not breathing like a monk, he said. The novice looked up, startled. Rio turned, motioning for him to follow. They walked in silence through the bamboo grove to the kitchen courtyard, where a wide clay bowl stood filled with clear water. Sit, Rio said. The novice sat. Rio picked up a small stick, and without a word, he stirred the water, gently at first, then faster, until the surface churned and the reflection broke into chaos. The novice watched. Then Rio set the stick down. They sat in silence. The bowl shimmered, then slowed, then stilled. The novice could suddenly see his own face again in the reflection. Rio looked at him and asked, Did I make the water still? The novice blinked. Number it settled by itself. Rio nodded. So will your mind. And he walked away. This is the story of trusting the stillness beneath disturbance. Commentary. Many people believe meditation is about forcing silence, forcing peace, erasing all thought. But in truth, it is about letting the water settle. Your mind is like a bowl of clear water. Every thought, every worry, every fear is like a stick stirring it. The more you react, the more you stir. The more you chase silence, the more turbulence you create. But if you sit and breathe and wait without judgment, the water begins to settle on its own. This is the natural wisdom of the mind. You don't need to fix it. You need to allow it. There's a Zen saying, muddy water clears itself if left alone. The novice learned something that day, not from a sutra, not from a formal teaching, but from water. He stopped fighting his thoughts. Instead, he watched them. Like leaves drifting across a pond. He stopped demanding they leave, and instead bowed as they passed. And slowly, something began to shift, not instantly, but gently, like the bowl that stopped churning the moment no hand stirred it. This is how peace comes. Not by control, not by perfection, but by patience, by the quiet knowing that nothing stirred stays stirred forever. If you are anxious, sit like the bowl. If you are overwhelmed, breathe like the wind that forgets itself. If you are angry, wait like the pond after rain. It will pass, all of it. And when it does, clarity returns. You'll see your reflection again. Not because you forced it, but because you didn't run. So next time you feel lost in thought, don't fix, don't flee, just wait. And let the water be water. The full moon rose slowly over the temple pond. Its pale light spilled across the stone paths, kissed the tips of bamboo leaves, and finally rested on the water surface. Perfect, round, and still. A quiet hush fell over the garden. Even the crickets seemed to pause. It was as if the world had stopped breathing, just long enough to notice the moon. But what the monks gathered around the pond saw was not the real moon. It was only a reflection. A novice named Kaoru sat cross-legged near the water's edge. She had come to meditate, but found herself staring at the luminous circle. It shimmered with every ripple. It danced when the breeze blew. It fractured into 1,000 pieces when a frog leapt across. And yet, when the pond stilled again, there it was, whole, unmoved, unaffected. The head monk, Master Renji, approached quietly. He sat beside her without a word. For a while they both watched. Finally, Kaoru whispered, "It looks so real." Renji nodded. "It does." She tilted her head. "But it's not. It's just light." Renji smiled. "Is your reflection in the mirror not you?" Kaoru hesitated. "I don't know. It looks like me, but it's not me." "Then what is it?" he asked. "A copy," she guessed. Renji turned to her. "And what is your idea of yourself?" She blinked. "A reflection." Renji picked up a small stone. He held it above the pond, then let it fall. Plop! The moon shattered again. 1,000 tiny moons danced outward on the ripples. "Does the moon mind?" he asked. Kaoru laughed softly. "No." "Does the moon change?" "No," she said again. Renji looked at her gently. "Then let your mind be the sky, not the water. The moon is always whole, whether you see it clearly or not." That night, Kaoru wrote in her journal, "I chase shadows. I polish reflections. I mistake the moon in the water for the truth." The next morning, during temple chores, Kaoru knocked over a bowl. It shattered. Clay and rice spilled across the floor. She gasped. But instead of panic, she remembered the moon. A fellow novice scolded her. She bowed, cleaned the mess. Inside, she felt no shame. only the quiet smile of someone who had seen a truth. Weeks later, a guest philosopher visited the temple. He asked the monks, "What is real?" Some spoke of emptiness, others of causes and conditions. One offered the Heart Sutra. But when the question came to Kaoru, she said, "The moon and the water." She explained, "The moon is reality. The water is our mind. When our mind is still, reality reflects clearly. When disturbed, the image breaks, but not the truth." The philosopher nodded slowly. "That is poetic, but how do you know it's true?" Kaoru looked up. "Because when I stop chasing the reflection, I feel the light on my face." That night, Master Renji shared a final koan with the gathered monks. A monk asked, "Master, what is enlightenment?" The master pointed to the moon in the sky. Then he pointed to the moon in the water. Then he smiled. No answer, no explanation, just two moons, and the silence between them. There is a saying in Zen, "Do not mistake the finger pointing to the moon for the moon itself." And so the teachings end where they began, with a reflection, a still pond, a moon that never moved, and a student who finally stopped looking for herself in the ripples. She never meant harm. She only passed on what she heard. A whispered comment here, a raised eyebrow there, a half-finished sentence passed along like a secret prayer. Her name was Sister Nima, young, lively, kind mostly, but her words moved quickly and quietly unraveled the thread of trust inside the temple. At first, it was small. She meditates longer when people are watching. They say the head cook isn't really vegetarian. I heard the abbot used to be married. No malice, just conversation, just sharing. But soon, monks began to turn away from each other in the corridor. Silent meals grew tenser. Chanting lost its rhythm. Smiles stiffened at the edges. No one named the cause, but it lingered, like smoke with no fire. One afternoon, the abbot asked Sister Nima to join him in the garden. The plum trees were beginning to blossom, delicate petals stirring in the breeze. He held a small bag in his hand. "Walk with me," he said gently. They walked in silence down the path that circled the temple grounds. After a while, he opened the bag and began to scatter chicken feathers along the way. Sister Nima tilted her head. "Why are you doing that?" The abbot didn't answer. When they returned to the garden, he handed her the empty bag. "Now," he said, "go and collect them all." She blinked. "But the wind's taken them. They're scattered everywhere." He looked at her and said softly, "So too with your words." That night she wept. This is the story of speech and consequence, of how sound can build or destroy. Commentary. In Buddhist practice, right speech is one of the Eightfold Path's pillars. It sounds simple, but it is one of the hardest, because words don't vanish when we stop speaking. They ripple, they stain, they take root in someone else's mind, sometimes forever. Sister Nima did not speak with cruelty, but neither did she speak with care. And in that space, in the absence of intention, harm took hold. We often forget how powerful language is. A word can lift someone from despair or push them over the edge. It can invite reflection or ignite shame Words are not just air. They are actions. They build worlds. There's a Zen saying, "Speak only if it improves upon the silence." Sister Nima filled silence with curiosity, suspicion, drama, and the silence grew quieter, but colder, until no one trusted what they didn't hear. The Buddha once said, "A person is not wise because they speak much. A person is wise when they speak what is true and what causes no harm." That is the gate of right speech. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If it fails even one, it's better to let it drift away like a feather on the wind. After that night, Sister Nima changed. She stopped repeating what others said. She listened more, spoke less. When she did speak, her words came slowly, like water poured from a clean bowl. The monks began to look at her differently, not because she had become wise overnight, but because she was watching herself now, watching what she left behind in others when she spoke. And over time, trust returned to the temple, not because of a sermon, not because of a rule, but because one person saw the feathers scatter and chose to stop scattering more. So speak with care. Speak like you're building something with your breath. Because you are. Every sentence is a seed, and whether it blooms or bruises is up to you. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. She was just the cleaning woman. That's what most called her. Not nun, not practitioner, not devotee, just the woman who swept the temple. She arrived before sunrise, her hair tied back in a grey knot, her robes plain and faded, her broom worn thin at the bristles. She did not chant, did not preach, did not study sutras in the main hall. She swept the stone walkways, the meditation hall. The steps no one noticed were dusty until they were clean. And when she swept, she smiled. Some of the younger monks whispered, "She's not really practicing. She doesn't even sit in the morning zazen. She just does chores." But she never responded. She bowed to them anyway. Years passed. One by one, the monks left for higher temples, deeper study, more advanced masters. But she remained, still sweeping, still silent, still smiling. One spring morning, the abbot called for an assembly. The monks gathered, some sitting in strict posture, others blinking away sleep. The abbot raised his voice gently. "I have been observing this temple for many years," he said. "And in all this time, only one among you has reached the heart of the Dharma." Heads turned. The scholars straightened their backs. The meditation leaders adjusted their robes. The younger monks held their breath. And then the abbot looked to her, the woman with the broom. She was in the corner, brushing dust from the edge of a wooden beam. She paused, looked up, and smiled. A silence fell over the room. Then whispers. But she never studied the Diamond Sutra. She never debates koans. She doesn't even recite the Heart Sutra. The abbot turned to them and said, "She lives it." This is the story of embodied wisdom, the kind that doesn't speak loudly, but moves like breath through a humble act. Commentary. There is a great misunderstanding in spiritual life, that awakening comes only through texts or teachers or temples. But the Buddha taught in forests. He sat beneath trees. He pointed to rivers and mountains and empty bowls. He said, "The way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart." The woman who swept the temple did not need to talk about mindfulness. She was mindfulness. Every stroke of her broom was deliberate, every step a prayer, every breath a chant. She did not perform her devotion, she lived it. You can memorize every scripture and still miss the truth. You can quote the sutras and still live with bitterness. But you cannot sweep the floor with love for 30 years and not be changed. The Dharma is not performance. It is not approval. It is presence. Many monks seek truth like a prize. They strive. They compare. They seek recognition. But the woman who swept the temple had no audience, no ambition, only a broom, a path, and her attention. That is enough. That is more than enough. There's a Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." Because the truth doesn't take you away from the world. It brings you deeper into it. It makes you pay attention. To dust in corners, to the sound of your own breath, to how gently you place a bowl on the table. We live in a time of noise, of opinions, of spectacle, of credentials. But the Dharma whispers, sweep, breathe, smile, and mean it. That is enough. So wherever you are, whether folding laundry, washing dishes, answering emails, tying your child's shoes, do it with all of you. Do it like the woman who swept the temple, and let the dust be your teacher too. Every morning at 6:15 she opened the curtains. The light crept in slowly, soft and golden, and the photo on the mantel caught it just right. It was old, sepia-toned, edges curled like leaves in autumn. A man in uniform, smiling, handsome, still young. Her husband, gone now for 17 years. Miriam never moved the photo. It stayed on the same spot. Third tile from the right, 2 inches from the lamp. She didn't talk to it, didn't cry over it. She simply saw it. Every day. Grief for her had stopped being a storm. It had become weather, something you dress for, something you feel without needing to fight. Once, her granddaughter asked, "Why don't you get rid of that old photo? You have better ones on your phone." Miriam just smiled. That one isn't for looking. It's for remembering. Her husband had died in his sleep. No warnings, no pain, just silence. She found him in the morning, hands still curled as if holding a dream. She didn't scream, didn't collapse. She sat beside him, held his hand and whispered, "Thank you." People told her to be strong. She didn't try. She simply continued. At the temple nearby, the monks would speak of impermanence, of how everything changes, how attachment creates suffering. Miriam understood this. Not as an idea, but as a reality. She loved her husband deeply, but she did not clutch him. Even in his absence, she let him be gone. And in doing so, he never truly left. There's a Zen teaching. To hold a butterfly, you must open your palm. Miriam didn't keep a shrine, didn't tell his story over and over. She just lived in a way that would make him proud. She tended the garden they once planted together. She drank the coffee he used to brew. she folded his shirts one last time and gave them away. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she didn't want her love to become a cage. One day, a neighbor lost her husband. She came to Miriam, eyes red, voice shaking. "I don't know how to live without him." Miriam poured tea, sat with her, said nothing at first, then quietly offered, "You don't live without him. You live with the part of him that still breathes in you." The neighbor sobbed. And Miriam did not stop her. She just placed a hand on hers and let it be. Love doesn't end. It changes shape. And grief, too, is a form of love. One that knows how to bow. Miriam is older now, hands soft with age. Memories flickering at the edges, but she still opens the curtains each morning. Still lets the light find the photo, not to bring him back, but to let him go again, gently, lovingly, without holding. In the 17th century, Japan was changing. Temples were quiet. Monks walked with their hands folded inside sleeves, heads bowed against the cold wind of politics, poverty, and war. But in Kyoto, a monk named Tetsugen Doko had a dream: to bring the sutras, the sacred texts of the Buddha, to the people. Not locked away in elite monasteries, not spoken only in the high Chinese script of scholars, but printed, in Japanese, on paper, so the common farmer, the weaver, the rice merchant, and the child sweeping the temple steps could read the Buddha's words. He would print them, all of them, in woodblock form, an enormous undertaking. Tetsugen began with nothing, no paper, no ink, no press, no woodblocks, just a robe, a bowl, and a vow. So he traveled the countryside, bowl in hand, asking for donations, not for himself, but for the words of the Dharma. At first, people were skeptical. A monk with no monastery, a printing press as a spiritual act. But Tetsugen spoke with quiet conviction. He did not pressure. He did not persuade. He simply bowed and spoke of a dream where truth could be read by all. And slowly, the donations came. Coins, rice, a silver hairpin from a widow, a child's carved flute. One woman brought a single perfect sheet of handmade paper and said, "I cannot read, but may this help someone who can." Years passed. Tetsugen traveled through mountain towns and port cities. He walked in sun, in snow, in silence. The money piled up, not in bags, but in faith, until finally, he had enough. Enough for paper, ink, carvers, labor. The work could begin, but then disaster struck. The Uji River flooded. A great famine swept across the land. Families went hungry. Children cried into bowls of water. And Tetsugen looked at the money he had gathered. He did not hesitate. He gave every coin to relief. Food was bought, homes were rebuilt, the suffering eased, and the printing dream disappeared for a time. When the crisis passed, Tetsugen began again. From zero, bowl in hand, dust on his feet. The same quiet voice, the same calm vow. This time, people gave more quickly. They remembered, they trusted. He gathered enough once more. The press was readied, woodblocks carved. Then, epidemic. A plague swept through Kyoto. The poor collapsed in alleys. Temples turned into infirmaries. And once again, Tetsugen gave all the money away. The third time, he began again. Older now, slower, but steady. His vow never cracked, and after many years, the sutras were finally printed in 7,000 woodblocks, hand-carved and inked with devotion. The first complete Japanese printing of the Buddhist canon. Even today, the blocks are preserved at Obaku Monastery in Kyoto, a monument to patience, to persistence, to presence. But ask a Zen master about Tetsugen's sutras, and they will smile and say, yes, he printed 3 editions, but the first 2 are the most beautiful. Commentary. Zen is not impressed by grand gestures, it is moved by quiet truth. Tetsugen's vow was not to ink, not to paper, but to service. And so, when suffering appeared, he did not cling to his dream. He let it go, not out of failure, but out of deeper practice. The first 2 editions were never printed, but they were lived. Printed in rice, in shelter, in the body of a starving child who lived because of his decision. Printed in the woman who kept her husband another year because Tetsugen paid for medicine instead of woodblocks. Printed in the hearts of strangers who saw that the Dharma is not words, but action. The third edition, that was just the form. The content had already been carved in compassion. Tetsugen teaches us, your vow is not what you say when it's easy. It's what you do when it costs you. And in those moments, when your deepest aspiration must bend to the needs of others, that is the real test of the way. We all have sutras we want to print, projects, dreams, a book, a vision, a calling. And often, the world interrupts, crisis, illness, family, but Zen does not see this as failure. It sees it as opportunity to offer, to release, to serve something greater than the plan. And when the time is right, you return, you begin again. Because nothing is lost. Each pause is part of the rhythm. Each surrender shapes the heart. Each detour deepens the vow. There is no need to rush. If the heart remains clear, even a delay becomes Dharma. Even an interruption becomes a verse. Even a famine becomes a teaching. Tetsugen walked the mountains for decades, but the greatest thing he carried was patience, a faith that giving is not giving up, and that sometimes the invisible sutras are the ones that save us most. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. The wind in Lumbini moved gently, like breath held between 2 worlds. It was spring, the trees were in bloom, and the sal branches swayed with the weight of 1,000 white blossoms, drifting like snow through sunlight. The grove itself had always been sacred, but on this day, it held its breath, because something was about to happen. Queen Maya of Kapilavastu had travelled far. Her time was near, and by custom, she had chosen to give birth in her family's village. The journey had been long, but gentle. Attendants walked quietly beside her. The sky stayed clear, and the earth itself seemed to soften beneath their steps. When they reached Lumbini, Maya smiled. Here, the air was different, cooler, still. The light filtered through the trees in beams so soft they looked like silk. She stepped down from her carriage, removed her sandals, and walked barefoot into the grove. Birds did not flee. They simply paused. At the center of the grove stood a tall sal tree, wide-branched and flowering. She reached for a low branch and rested her hand upon it. She did not cry out. She did not tremble. She breathed. And there, beneath the trees upon the earth in silence, a child was born. He did not enter with a cry. He entered with awareness. His eyes opened wide, dark and deep like the night before rain. His skin was said to shine with a glow not of this world, and the breeze, once soft, began to stir the leaves as if to sing. Attendants rushed forward. The midwife covered her mouth. The sky turned golden for a breath, and legend says that the flowers on the sal tree bent low to witness. The child did not wait to be carried. He stood. He took 7 steps, and with each step, where his foot touched the ground, a lotus bloomed. Not imagined, not metaphor, but real. Petals unfurled beneath his heels. Fragrance filled the air, and the world paused. Animals stopped their grazing, streams paused their song, and even the wind, surprised by the holiness of the moment, turned back to watch. When the 7th step was taken, the boy raised one hand to the sky and one to the earth. And in a voice that was not learned but remembered, he said, "In this life, I am born for the benefit of all beings. This is my final birth. I will put an end to suffering." It is said that the Devas, gods of distant realms, gathered in silence, their hands folded, their eyes lowered, because something rare had occurred. A bodhisattva, fully awakened in past lives, had returned to walk the earth once more. Heavenly flowers fell through the air. Trumpets sounded without instruments. Celestial beings whispered blessings the humans could not hear. And yet even those on earth, who had no names for such wonders, felt the shift. One man wept without knowing why. One horse knelt in its harness. A pot of rice boiled over though no fire was lit. Something had entered the world, something ancient, and entirely new. He was named Siddhartha, which means he who achieves his aim. In his small face, those who looked closely saw both softness and strength, an ocean of stillness behind the movements of a child. He did not laugh more or cry less than other babies, but when he looked into your eyes, it felt as though he saw through the lifetimes you had forgotten. Queen Maya held him close, felt his heartbeat against her own, but in her heart she knew this child did not belong only to her. He belonged to the world. Word of the birth traveled quickly. When the child was only days old, the king summoned the wise sages of the land. Among them came Asita, an old hermit who lived in the mountains, wrapped in robes the color of ash, with eyes that had watched the turning of many seasons. He entered the palace slowly, carried no staff, asked no favor. He only asked to see the child. When Siddhartha was placed before him, Asita's lips trembled. Tears welled in his eyes, not from sorrow, but from recognition. He bowed low before the infant. And when he rose, he turned to the king. "This child will not rule a kingdom. He will rule the heart. He will not wield armies. He will end suffering. He is destined to become a Buddha, an awakened one. He will show the way beyond sorrow. But I will not live to see his teaching. That is my only sadness. and he bowed once more. The room fell still. Even the oil lamps seemed to lean closer. The king said nothing. The queen held her son more tightly. Maya did not live long after the birth. Some say it was her karma to return to the celestial realm, that to carry a Buddha is to carry a world, and some bodies are made only to hold such grace for a little while. Others say she became his guardian spirit, that she watched from beyond the veil, her presence in every breeze that cooled his fever, every bird that sang outside his window. Siddhartha was raised by her sister. He grew in the lap of comfort. But the memory of the grove, the trees, the moonlit dream, those lived on. Years later, when Siddhartha became the Buddha, he never spoke often of his birth. He taught of suffering, of the path, of breath, of impermanence. But once, when asked what it meant that he had walked on lotus blossoms, he smiled and said, "The path was already beneath me. I did not make it appear, I only stepped where it had always been. Because truth is not invented, it is remembered." Like petals underfoot, waiting to be noticed. And so the child who walked on lotus blossoms became the man who taught others to walk in peace. One step, then another, until suffering too began to bloom into wisdom. Once there was a king who ruled over a vast and golden land. His palace was made of marble and sandalwood. His robes shimmered with threads of moonlight. His name echoed through the valleys like a song carried on wind. But one day, in the middle of a grand festival, the king grew suddenly tired. He stepped away from the court, laid down in the shade of a fig tree, and closed his eyes, just for a moment. And in that moment, he dreamed. In the dream, he was no longer a king. He was a farmer. His hands were calloused. His home was a straw hut. He tilled the soil each morning, worked through sweat and storm, and fell asleep beside a dying lantern. Years passed in this dream. He married, had children, lost crops, buried a son. He aged, sickened, and finally lay dying in his dream bed of straw, holding his daughter's hand. As he drew his last breath, he awoke, back under the fig tree, back in silk, back in the sound of distant music from the palace. No time had passed. Only the blink of an eye, he sat up and wept. This is the story of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and illusion. Commentary. The Buddha once said, "This world is a dream, a bubble, a shadow. See it as such." But it does not mean the world is meaningless. It means that clinging to the dream, believing it is the whole of reality, is what causes suffering. The king's dream felt real. He loved, he cried, he endured, and yet it was only a flicker in his mind. When he awoke, he was still himself, still whole, still the same awareness, only now clearer. So too with rebirth. You are born into a form, live a life, gather names, habits, memories, and when that form ends, the awareness that knew it does not die. It simply moves, like a dreamer waking into another dream. Samsara is not a punishment. It is a lesson, a series of dreams to awaken from. Not by denying them, but by seeing through them. When the king returned to court, he no longer ruled with pride. He ruled with humility, with tenderness, as one who knew that even a crown is made of the same dust as a farmer's hoe. He often sat under that same fig tree in silence. When people asked why, he would only say, "That is where I remembered." One day, he invited monks to his court. Among them was a sage known for his stillness. The king asked him, "How do I know which world is the dream and which is true?" The monk replied with a smile, "Ask the one who is watching them both." Who is that? The witness, the awareness, the one who saw the king dreaming of the farmer, the one who sees you dreaming this life. It is not your name, not your face, not even your memories. It is that which knows, always watching, always here, even as the dream changes. This is the mind beyond mind, the unshaken center, the part of you that does not sleep, even when the body rests. The Buddha's teachings do not try to wake you with alarm bells. They whisper. They let you walk the path until one day, under a tree or beside a river or in a quiet moment between breaths, you see it for yourself. This is a dream. And yet, I am real. The king died many years later, not in fear, but as one who knew how dreams begin and end. He left behind a poem carved into the fig tree. When I was awake, I thought I ruled. When I slept, I thought I served. Now I know I am neither. I am the dreamer and the waking. So when the world feels heavy or the illusion too thick, sit quietly. Breathe and ask yourself, what part of me is watching this? Not to escape the dream, but to wait kindly inside it. The novice stepped forward, eyes low, robes gathered neatly in his arms. He had heard whispers of the great master Joshu, of his clarity, of his presence, of the way his words, brief, sharp, could undo years of illusion in a single moment. And so, the novice came with a question, simple, ancient, and burning. He bowed deeply. Does a dog have Buddha nature? Joshu looked at him, quiet as a still pond, then said, "Moo." Just that. One word, moo. The novice blinked. He had expected a teaching, a parable, perhaps even a sermon on interdependence or karma. But all he got was this one syllable, moo. Number not no, as in rejection, but moo, as in as in empty, as in beyond yes or no. The novice opened his mouth to speak again, to clarify, to plead for context. But Joshu had already returned to trimming the bonsai. And the novice was left standing there, holding a question that would not let go. Does a dog have Buddha nature? In the Mahayana tradition, the answer is yes. All beings have Buddha nature, even the smallest ant, even the vilest criminal, even the barking dog on the dusty street. The Heart Sutra says, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. So why did Joshu say moo? It wasn't to contradict the sutras, it was to shock the mind out of seeking answers like stones in a riverbed. For weeks, the novice could not sleep. He replayed the moment again and again. He wrote MU in his journal. He whispered it during walking meditation. He shouted it into the wind. He carried it like a thorn in the foot, every step made sharper by its presence. One night, a senior monk approached him in the meditation hall. "Why do you look so troubled?" he asked. The novice bowed his head. Master Joshu gave me a koan. Does a dog have Buddha nature? He said. Moo! I don't understand. The monk smiled gently. You won't. Not yet. The novice frowned. Then what should I do? Burn your logic, said the monk, and sit. In the centuries that followed, Joshu's moo became the first koan in the Gateless Gate, a collection of paradoxical encounters meant to tear open the mind. And it is said that some monks meditated on moo for 5 years, 10, even 20. Not because the question was hard, but because the answer required the death of the one asking it. Moo is not a word, it is a doorway, but it has no latch, no hinges, no frame. Only a gate that exists because the mind insists there must be one. And the moment you stop trying to walk through it, it disappears. The novice became obsessed. He stopped eating. He stopped speaking. He carried moo through every moment like a fever dream. He touched it while pouring tea. He chewed it like rice. He sat with it in the dark until the wind outside sounded like it was chanting back to him. Muh, muh, muh. He began to tremble. And still, no clarity, no breakthrough, only silence. One dawn, after 300 days of silent retreat, he broke. He stood in the rain, lifted his head to the grey sky, and shouted, "What is moo?" The sound echoed against the temple walls. A bird fluttered. A branch creaked, but nothing answered. He fell to his knees, not in defeat, in surrender, not to ignorance, but to not knowing. And in that moment, he let go, not just of the question, but of the one who needed the answer. And that's when it happened. Not a flash, not a thunderclap, just a quiet shift, a falling away, and everything returned. The wind, the breath, the feeling of water on his skin, the sound of a dog barking in the distance. Nothing extraordinary, and yet everything was different. He stood, he laughed, he bowed. Later, when the novice returned to Joshu, the master asked no questions. He looked once in the monk's eyes and simply said, "Good." Nothing more, because no explanation was needed. You cannot explain moo, you can only become it. Commentary. In Western terms, we often ask, is it this or that? Zen asks, who is asking? Joshu's moo is not a negation of the dog's Buddha nature. It is a negation of the very framework of the question. To ask, does a dog have Buddha nature, is to separate Buddha nature from dog, to assume that it's something a being might possess. But Buddha nature is not a possession. It is not a label. It is the breath before thought, the space before division. Moo is the erasure of the chalkboard before the question is even written. Zen does not want you to answer the question. It wants the question to consume you, until there's nothing left, until only presence remains, until even moo is forgotten. And the wind in the pines is enough. The gateless gate is open to all. But to pass through, you must stop trying to pass. You must stop searching for the latch. There is no moo outside yourself. It is not in the words of sutras, not in the mind's debate. It is here, now, when all seeking stops and the moment is allowed to be, just as it is, even a barking dog, Even your own confusion, even the silence after reading this sentence. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. The Buddha sat beneath a sal tree, where the light filtered through in flickering gold. The breeze played gently with the hem of his robe, and the scent of early jasmine lingered in the air. Around him, the monks gathered like ripples around a pebble dropped in a still pond. Quiet, present, steady. They bowed one by one and took their seats on the grass, robes the color of ochre and clay. The forest around them hummed with life, birds calling from high branches, the distant crack of bamboo, and the low murmur of wind moving through tall grass. The Buddha's eyes remained half lowered, still and soft. Then from the circle, a young monk rose. He was thin, his frame taut with discipline, but his brow was furrowed, his lips pressed with quiet unrest. He stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Master," he said, "I have studied the teachings as best I can. I rise before dawn. I recite every sutra. I memorize every verse. I follow every precept. And still, I suffer. Still my mind is troubled. I fear I've become attached to the very teachings meant to free me." He hesitated. Am I clinging to the Dharma itself? The Buddha looked upon him gently. "You remind me of a traveler," he said. "Let me tell you a story." The monks settled deeper into stillness. The forest too seemed to pause. "There was once a man," the Buddha began, "wandering through a thick and treacherous forest. The trees were close, the thorns sharp. On all sides he was hemmed in by danger, wild beasts, hunger, cries in the distance that made his skin crawl. For hours, maybe days, he pushed forward, uncertain and afraid, until he came to a wide, roaring river. On the other side, he could see sunlight falling on an open path. He saw smoke curling from a distant hut. Safety, rest, the way forward." The Buddha paused, letting the image take shape. But there was no bridge, no boat. The current was fierce. He could not swim across without being swept away. So the man worked. He cut branches, wove reeds, bent saplings into shape. With patience, sweat, and determination, he fashioned a raft, just strong enough to carry him. He clutched it tightly, guided it across the swirling water. His heart pounded with fear, but he reached the far bank, soaked, trembling, but alive. The Buddha's eyes swept slowly across the circle of monks. "Now imagine," he continued, "that once on land, the man looked at the raft and said, 'This has saved me. This is precious. I will carry it with me always.' And so he lifted it onto his shoulders and continued his journey, the heavy wood digging into his back, slowing his steps, wearing him down." A faint rustle of recognition moved through the group. "Would that make sense?" the Buddha asked. The monks shook their heads. "Of course not," the Buddha said. "The raft served its purpose. It brought him across. To carry it afterward, to cling to it, would only bring suffering." He turned to the young monk. "So too with the Dharma." The monk blinked, uncertain. "But the teachings are sacred," he said. "Aren't they to be kept close? Aren't they the source of liberation?" The Buddha nodded. "They are sacred, but sacred does not mean permanent. The Dharma is not a cage. It is not a burden to be shouldered forever. It is a tool, a raft, a means to cross the river of confusion and craving. Once you have crossed, you need not drag the boat behind you. Another monk raised his hand. "Master," he asked softly, "what if one forgets or finds themselves back at the river?" "Then rebuild the raft," said the Buddha. "Relearn, begin again, but never mistake the raft for the shore. The Dharma is not the destination, it is the guide." A hush followed, filled only by the hush of the wind and the rhythmic clicking of cicadas. Later that evening, as the sun descended behind the line of trees and turned the sky to a warm, bruised lavender, the monks returned to their huts, some with new questions, others with lighter hearts. But the young monk lingered. He wandered to the river near the monastery, where the water curled gently around stones and reeds. He sat on the bank, knees pulled in, and listened. The moon had begun its slow rise, casting silver light across the ripples. The monk breathed deeply. He thought of the teachings he had memorized, the sutras chanted, the rules obeyed, the rituals performed. Each had been a plank, a vine, a thread in the raft that carried him across his inner storm. He remembered the fear that had driven him to this path, the grief of his father's death, the anger he once held like a fire in his chest, the shame of worldly desire. Each teaching had helped him cross some inner current, but now, here he sat, dry but weary, clutching the raft as though it were still necessary. And he saw. He had carried not just the teachings, but his pride in them, his fear of failure, his guilt for each imperfect thought, his grasping for perfection, and all of these too were rafts, built to carry him through old pain, meant to be honored, yes, but then let go. He closed his eyes. The breeze shifted. The night deepened. By morning, he rose and returned to the Buddha. He bowed low, his hands open, his heart quiet. "I have crossed," he said softly, and the Buddha replied, "Then walk freely." No further instruction, no ceremony, just a smile, the kind that sees without needing to explain. Because truth, like a raft, is not meant to be worshipped. It is meant to be used, held for a time, then released. And so the monk walked on, not empty, but unburdened. He still chanted, still meditated, still studied the sutras. But now he did so not out of fear, not to be perfect, but because he understood their purpose. They were not chains, they were maps, and once you arrive, you do not need the map to breathe. Years later, when a new monk came with the same question, full of guilt, clinging to rules like a man clutching driftwood, he told him of the raft. He pointed to the river and smiled. There was once a garden behind a monastery, not grand, not famous, just a quiet patch of earth behind the northern wall. Monks took turns tending it, pulling weeds, watering rows of vegetables, scattering herbs for bees. But there was one monk, young and full of questions, who never understood the point. His name was Anyo. He had come to the monastery seeking answers about karma, rebirth, and enlightenment, and all he seemed to be doing was weeding cabbages. One morning, he sat in the dirt beside the old gardener, Master Banyan, and asked, "Why am I here? I came to learn the truth of existence, not harvest radishes. Banyan didn't look up. He plucked a small stone from the soil and said, "Tell me, Anyo, do you know what kind of seed this is?" Anyo shook his head. Banyan smiled. "Neither do I, but we'll find out in time." Later that week, the master handed Anyo a pouch of seeds. "Plant these," he said, "just one each day." So Anyo did. One on Monday, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday. By the second week, he asked, "What are they?" Banyan only replied, "Keep planting." Weeks passed. Shoots emerged. Some were thin and green, some strong and red-veined, some curled into spirals, others drooped under their own weight. Anyo began to notice which plants needed more water, which thrived in shade, which invited birds. He stopped asking what they were and started tending them for what they needed. By midsummer, the garden had transformed, not because of what Anyo had planted, but because of how he had planted. This is the story of karma as intention, how what we plant becomes our world. Commentary. We often think of karma as a great book in the sky, that someone somewhere is keeping score. But karma is not accounting, it's gardening. Every thought, word, and action is a seed. Some bloom quickly, some take years, some seem to disappear, only to sprout when the rains return. Anyo wanted to learn about karma, but he expected a scroll, a sermon, or a secret. Instead, he got a pouch of seeds. Because karma isn't something you learn, it's something you live. You discover it with every gesture, every tone in your voice, every time you choose to act with care or without it. Some people say, "But I didn't mean to hurt anyone." But even unintentional seeds grow. A sharp word, a careless gesture, a forgotten promise. Each one goes into the soil of the world. But so do quiet kindnesses. A bowl of warm rice, a door held open, a moment of patience with someone slower than you. These bloom too, even when you never see them again. Banyan once said to Anyo, "Don't ask what the seed will become. Ask what the soil needs today." That is the heart of intention. Not just what you do, but why. Karma begins not with action, but with intention. Even the Buddha said, "It is volition, monks, that I call karma. For having willed, one acts by body, speech, and mind." Years later, Anyo became a teacher. He no longer spoke of karma as fate. He taught his students how to garden their lives, how to pause before speaking, how to breathe before judging, how to water what they wish to grow, inside themselves and others. One student once asked him, "What is the best seed to plant?" Anyo smiled and said, "Attention to this moment and how you meet it." So the next time you move through your day, ask yourself, what am I planting and where? Because every moment is soil, and your attention is the seed. A house stood at the edge of a quiet village. It wasn't grand. Its roof sagged a little. Its floorboards creaked, but the door was always open, and those who passed by often entered. One day, a traveler knocked. His shoulders were tight with worry, his breath short. He clutched his bag like it held every mistake he'd ever made. The host opened the door and smiled. "Come in," she said gently. "No judgment here. just tea and a place to rest. The next morning the traveller left, but soon another came, this time angry. Fists clenched, jaw locked. The host welcomed him too, showed him to a chair by the fire, listened to him shout, cry, fall silent, then gave him warm bread without asking why he was so upset. They kept coming. Joy danced through the garden one spring afternoon, barefoot and laughing. Grief followed days later, slow, grey, soaking wet from a sudden storm. Loneliness showed up in the middle of the night, shivering. Hope arrived unexpectedly, glowing faintly. Fear sometimes knocked twice in one day. Still, the host opened the door every time. One evening, a boy from the village asked, "Why do you let them all in, even the scary ones?" The host looked at the boy and said, "Because this house is a guest house, and all emotions are guests. They arrive, they stay, they leave. None of them are me." This story comes from an old Sufi poem by Rumi, beloved also in Buddhist circles. It teaches what meditation often reveals. You are not your emotions. You are the one who notices them, who makes space, who lets them pass through. Anger is not wrong. It is a guest, sometimes loud, sometimes dangerous. But it comes bearing messages, and if you slam the door in its face, it breaks in through the window. Sadness is not weakness. It is a guest. It may rearrange the furniture for a while. It may lie on the couch for days. But eventually, it moves on, especially if you sit beside it instead of pretending it isn't there. Joy too is a guest. And though it's tempting to cling to joy and beg it to stay, even joy must leave. That's okay. You can welcome it again tomorrow. The problem is not the emotions. The suffering comes when we believe they are permanent, when we build whole identities around them. I am anxious. I am unlovable. I am angry. But you are not those things. You are the house. They are just visitors. There's a story of a monk who struggled with anxiety. He tried to push it away, ignore it, meditate it into silence. Nothing worked. Until one day, his teacher said, "Stop fighting the visitor. Invite it in, serve it tea, ask it why it came." The next time anxiety returned, the monk didn't resist. He noticed his breath tightening, his chest constricting. And he whispered, "Welcome, you're here again." He didn't like it, but he didn't hate it either. He watched it, listened to it, sat with it, and slowly it softened, and eventually it left. This is what it means to live as a guest house, to offer your presence, your kindness, your non-attachment to whatever arises. It does not mean you let the guests destroy the house. It means you don't mistake them for permanent residents. You set boundaries, but not walls. You show compassion, not control. You practice presence, not possession. Sometimes guests arrive unannounced. Sometimes they slam the door. Sometimes they cry in the middle of the night. That's okay. You breathe. You listen. You stay grounded in the structure of the house. The breath, the body, the awareness that is always home. Commentary. The guest house reminds us of the temporary nature of all emotions. Nothing stays forever, no matter how intense. And by opening the door instead of guarding it with fear or shame, we reclaim something powerful. Agency. Because when you welcome a feeling, you stop being its prisoner. To be the host is not to be passive. It is to be strong, grounded, compassionate enough to say, "This too belongs, but it will not stay forever, and it is not who I am." You are not broken for feeling grief. You are not failing because fear has returned. You are not weak for missing someone. You are alive, and the guest house of aliveness is open to all visitors, even the ones that make us uncomfortable. When you practice this kind of welcoming, something beautiful happens. You stop judging others for their emotions too. You recognize their guests. You become safer, more compassionate, more real, because you've sat with your own visitors, and you know what it means to offer space. So tonight, when something arrives, a pang in your chest, a wave of sadness, a flicker of joy, pause, breathe, and ask gently, "What do you need? You're welcome here. For now." Then let it pass, let it teach you, let it leave, and return to silence. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. In the garden behind the old temple, there stood a stone Buddha. He had no golden crown, no ornate altar, no flowers at his feet, just stone dash, weathered by rain, wind, and decades of silence. Moss gathered at the base, vines crept along his arm, birds landed on his head without reverence. And still he sat, eyes closed, hands folded, unmoved. Generations of monks came and went. Some swept the garden path, others meditated nearby, but few paid the Buddha much mind. Time had dulled his features. No one prayed to him. Tourists ignored him for the bright lacquered statues inside the main hall. He was just there, part of the background. Then one day a child arrived. She was the daughter of a villager who came to deliver vegetables. While her father spoke to the cook, the girl wandered through the herb garden, past the bell tower, until she saw the statue. Something about it made her stop. Maybe it was the silence, maybe it was the stillness, or maybe it was the dust. She reached out and touched the cheek of the statue. It felt cold, rough, real. "Who is this?" she asked when her father returned. The cook chuckled. "Just an old Buddha. No one important." But the abbot, who had been nearby, turned and smiled. "No one important?" he said softly. "Then perhaps he is teaching more than we realize." The next day, the girl returned with a cloth. She wiped the statue's face gently. The dust didn't all come off. Some of it was too stubborn, too deep. Still, she came again the next day, and the next. She brought water, polished one ear, cleaned the fold of the robe. Not to make it shine, but to see what was underneath. Each day, the Buddha seemed to return a little more, not just to sight, but to presence. Soon, other villagers took notice. A few offered flowers. One man brought a small bowl of rice. The monks watched, a bit puzzled. "This statue has always been here," said one. "Why now?" The abbot simply nodded toward the girl. "Because someone remembered him." That evening, during the Dharma talk, the abbot told a story. "Long ago," he began, "there was a temple in Thailand that housed a clay Buddha. Plain, ordinary, but during renovations a crack formed, and when monks investigated, they found gold beneath the clay. He paused. For years, no one knew. Dust had hidden what was always shining. The monks were quiet. They knew he wasn't just talking about statues. We forget, the abbot continued, that beneath the dust of routine, of failure, of labels and years, there is gold. The girl didn't understand the full teaching, but she understood enough that something once ignored could be sacred, that what others pass by might be worth sitting with. Months passed. The Buddha still wore dust, but now it was brushed gently, not erased, just respected. His cracks weren't patched, his moss not scraped away, because the lesson was not perfection. It was presence. Years later, the girl grew older, left for school, moved to the city. But every time she returned home, she visited the statue, bowed, closed her eyes, and sat. One spring, she returned to find a small plaque had been placed beside the Buddha. It read, "Covered in dust, still whole." And beneath it, a haiku, "Stone does not forget, even as moss takes its hold." The silence remains. In the end, the statue never moved, never spoke, never sparkled, but it changed those who looked long enough, not by demanding attention, but by waiting patiently for someone to remember that beneath the dust, nothing was ever missing. There was once a monastery nestled in the cliffs above a wide, mist-covered valley. Travelers came from all over the land, seeking wisdom from the old abbot who lived at its heart. But no one ever entered without first passing through the gate of questions. It was a tall wooden door, weathered by time, bound in iron, and it never seemed to open, no matter how many times pilgrims knocked. Instead, beside the gate stood a young monk with a calm face and a single instruction. If you wish to pass, you must answer, "What keeps you from entering?" Some said, "My sins." Others said, "I'm not ready." One said, "I'm too angry." Another said, "I'm still seeking." To each answer, the monk bowed and said, "Return when you are not." And so the pilgrims would leave, some frustrated, some weeping, some silent. One day, a weathered traveler approached. She was older than most. Her robes were plain, her eyes clear. She stood before the gate and read the words carved above, "Liberation is here." Then she looked at the gate and realized there was no lock, no bolt, no bar, just a handle. She turned it. The door opened and she walked through. The monk beside the gate only smiled, because the lesson had never been in the answer. It had been in the assumption. This is the story of liberation, not as something earned, but as something already available, once illusion falls away. Commentary. Most of us believe the door is locked, that we must be perfect first, clean first, worthy first, empty of anger or sadness or self-doubt. But the Dharma does not wait for your perfection, it waits for your presence. The Buddha did not say, "You must transcend before you begin." He said, "See clearly." And in seeing, freedom unfolds. The gate of questions was never locked, but the mind said it was, because it clings to a self-image that believes, "I am not there yet. I am not enough. I am still broken." But brokenness too is part of the path, and sometimes it is the crack that lets the light through. Liberation is not far, it is not elsewhere. It is not earned, it is the moment you stop demanding anything of the moment and simply turn the handle. The traveller who opened the gate was not special. She had simply grown tired of pretending the barrier was real. She saw the door for what it was, just a door, and walked forward. The monks say the abbot greeted her without words, only a bow, because no celebration is needed for one who sees the obvious. This story is often told to new students when they first enter training. Some smile, some frown, but a few immediately stand up and walk to the edge of the room to check if the door is locked. And when it opens easily, you can always hear the soft laughter of awakening. So if you find yourself waiting for permission, waiting for a sign, waiting to be good enough to begin, ask, what if the door was never locked? What if I only needed to reach for it? And if your hand trembles, that's all right. Just turn the handle. The Dharma is not waiting behind it. The Dharma is the act of reaching. At the edge of the monastery was a pond, small, shallow, ringed with moss-covered stones. No fish swam in it. No lilies bloomed. It was quiet, so quiet you could hear dragonflies land on its surface. The monks would pass it daily on the way to morning meditation. Most gave it no thought. But one monk, young, curious, still a little wild in the heart, began to stop beside it each dawn. He would pick up a pebble, hold it, feel its weight, then toss it gently into the still water, and each time he would watch the ripples move outward, soft circles expanding from the center until they kissed the edges of the pond and vanished. One morning, the head teacher stood beside him. "You throw a pebble every day," he said. "Why?" The young monk didn't answer at first. Then he said, "I think I'm watching how something so small still affects everything." The teacher smiled, bent down, picked up his own stone, and said, "Every thought, every word, every action is a pebble in the pond of life." Then he let it fall. Ripples. The young monk began to understand that karma is not punishment or reward. It's simply the rippling of causes. What you do echoes. What you think spreads. Even in silence, something moves outward from you. That evening, while sweeping the courtyard, the young monk accidentally knocked over a jug of water. It splashed against the steps of the shrine. He froze, panicked, but the teacher, watching nearby, only nodded. "You see," he said, "another ripple, but not all ripples are wrong. Just seen." The monk began to practice more carefully. Not just his posture, but his thoughts. He noticed how anger, even when not spoken, changed the air around him. How a quiet smile offered to a passerby lingered like incense. One day, a traveller came to the monastery, troubled, distracted, unable to sit still during meditation. The young monk didn't say much, just poured him tea, listened, and as the man left, bowed gently. Later, the traveller returned, calmer. He said, "I don't know what helped me, but something about your silence made me feel still. A ripple. Not grand, not loud, just a movement born from presence. There is a story in Zen. A student asked, "How do I change the world?" The teacher replied, "Change the shape of the stone you drop into it." The young monk continued to visit the pond, but now he didn't throw pebbles each day. Sometimes he just sat, watching the water hold its breath. Because he understood now, it's not always about making ripples. Sometimes it's about learning to be still enough to feel them. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. Long ago, in the shadow of the Mahabharata range, there lived a young man named Jorin. He was clever, quick-witted, strong of voice and proud of heart. But Jorin carried something deeper, an anger that lived just beneath his skin, not always cruel, but sharp, like a wind that turned cold without warning. One day, after an argument with his father, Jorin stormed out of their stone cottage and began climbing the mountain trail above their village. "I don't need anyone," he shouted at the trees. But the forest only rustled in reply. He climbed higher until the air turned thin and the path narrowed to rock and dust. At the highest ridge, he stopped and yelled into the vastness below. "I hate you!" The words bounced off stone, and to his surprise, the mountain answered, "I hate you! I hate you!" The echo rang out across the cliffs, his own voice thrown back at him. Jorin blinked. He had never heard the mountain speak before. Curious, he cupped his hands again. "You're a fool!" The echo answered, "You're a fool, a fool." Now he laughed nervously. Then, hesitantly, he tried, "I love you." And again the valley responded, "I love you. Love you." His voice returned, but changed by the silence it passed through. Jorin stood there for a long time, the cold wind tugging at his sleeves, the vastness of the world pressing in. And then he turned back down the path, but quieter than before. This is the story of karma, of how what we send out returns. Commentary. In Sanskrit, karma means action, but not just physical action. Also thought, speech, intention. Each one plants a seed. And those seeds, over time, bear fruit, not as punishment, not as reward, but as response. Like an echo. The mountain did not decide to insult Jorin. It simply returned what was given. This is the truth of karma. The world is not judging you. It is reflecting you. The Buddha once said, "With our thoughts, we make the world." Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness follows you, like a shadow that never leaves. Most people think karma is about fate, but it's not. Karma is not what happens to you. It's how you move, and what that movement shapes in return. Jorin didn't change overnight, but that moment on the mountain stayed with him. He began to notice the way his words shaped the people around him, how a harsh joke left someone smaller, how a small kindness lifted a room. He didn't always get it right, but now he listened for the echo. One day, years later, Jorin stood at the base of the same mountain. His son, angry about a broken toy, was shouting at the sky. Jorin placed a hand on his shoulder and said, careful, little one. The mountain hears." The boy looked up, puzzled, and Jorin smiled. "Speak gently, even when no one answers right away. Because life is an echo. Sometimes it comes back loud, sometimes soft, sometimes years later, sometimes not until your children feel it. But it always returns. So what will you shout into the valley? What kind of world will your words shape? Be mindful of your echoes, because one day you'll hear them again in the heart of a wealthy city. Wrapped in silk and stone, lived a man who had everything. Gold draped his halls. Ivory framed his mirrors. Incense curled in soft waves from brass burners that never cooled. His name was Viran. He owned land, warehouses, servants, even ships that crossed oceans bearing his name on their sails. And yet, he could not sleep. Each night, he turned beneath embroidered sheets, his mind counting coins like sheep. Each morning, he awoke with new orders, new demands, new acquisitions. He kept building, kept gathering, but inside there was a tightness he could not name. One day, as he stepped from his carriage, he noticed a beggar sitting beside the temple gate. The beggar's robe was faded and torn. His alms bowl was empty, but his eyes were calm, still as a pond before dawn. Viran glanced at him and scoffed. "If I had nothing," he said, "I would not smile." The beggar bowed. "If you truly had nothing," he said, "you might finally know peace." The words followed Viran like a shadow. He tried to forget them, tried to drown them in wine, in silk, in celebration. But they clung like a thread caught in the lining of his soul. The next morning, he returned to the temple. The beggar was still there, eyes closed, back straight, breath soft. "How do you do this?" Viran asked. "You have no food, no roof, no gold, and yet you sit like you own the world." The beggar opened his eyes. "I do not own the world," he said, "but the world no longer owns me." Viran stared. Something inside him cracked. That day he left behind his ring. The next, his jeweled belt. Then quietly, he began walking to the temple each morning, leaving behind one possession at a time. No ceremony, no announcement, just letting go, piece by piece. The beggar never asked, never praised. He simply shared his seat on the stone step. Weeks passed. One morning, Viran arrived barefoot. No rings, no silks, no guards, only his breath and the ache in his knees. He sat beside the beggar, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt nothing pulling at him. No hunger for more, no fear of losing, no need to be seen, just stillness. He opened his eyes. "Have I become poor?" he asked. The beggar smiled. "No," he said softly. "You've become free." This is the story of true wealth, the kind that doesn't glitter, but glows from within. Commentary: wealth is not evil, it is neutral. Like a knife, it can feed or wound. Like fire, it can warm or consume. The Buddha taught that attachment, not possession, is the root of suffering. You can have little and still cling. You can have much and still be free. The beggar was not rich in gold, but he had space. He had his breath, his presence, his peace. He was not owned by anything, not even his own suffering. The parable reminds us, you are not your bank balance, not your reputation, not your wardrobe or your followers. You are the one who notices, the one who breathes, the one who can let go. Letting go is not about loss. It is about choice. When you no longer need a thing to feel complete, you are free to enjoy it or leave it without fear. That is the highest wealth. There's a Zen proverb, when I had nothing, I had everything. It does not mean destitution. It means this: when your hands are not full of fear and control, they are finally open to life. So whether you own much or little, ask yourself, do these things serve me? Or do I serve them? If they crumble, do I crumble too? Or am I the same presence, the same breath, the same open sky? Regardless, true wealth is not counted. It is felt. It is the spaciousness of a mind that can sit still beside a bowl, empty or full, and smile just the same. Be that kind of rich. The morning mist curled like breath above the water. Dew clung to each blade of grass, and the banyan trees stood tall and patient, their thick roots like ancient hands gripping the earth. In this quiet forest, life stirred slowly. A family of parakeets stretched their wings. Wildflowers opened their sleepy faces to the sun, and by the bend of a river, beneath the shade of a great banyan tree, grazed a herd of deer. Their leader was not the strongest in muscle, nor the swiftest in hoof, but in his eyes was a calm that held the wisdom of many lifetimes. He was the Buddha in a past life. And he was known as the banyan deer. He led not with fear, but with gentleness. When predators lurked, he guided the herd with silence and grace. When floods came, he taught them how to move with the water, not against it. And when food was scarce, he gave the youngest and oldest the first share. Even the wind seemed to part for him. But harmony rarely goes unnoticed for long. Not far beyond the forest, a new king had risen. Young, proud, hungry for grandeur. One morning, as he bathed in a river near the forest edge, a golden mango floated past. He took a bite and paused. The taste was unlike any fruit he had ever known, honeyed, rich, alive. "Where did this come from?" he asked. A servant replied, "From deep in the forest, sire, a grove the deer protect." The king stood. "Then I must have it." With drums and banners, he marched into the trees. His men cleared paths, felled smaller growth, and drove the deer into a vast enclosed reserve. The mango tree was surrounded, the forest taken. The deer were trapped. To amuse himself, the king began a game. Each day, a deer would be chosen to die, for his hunt, for his table, for sport. The deer grew restless. Mothers wept. Fawns shivered in the tall grass. Panic spread like fire. But the banyan deer did not run. He stepped forward and bowed before the king. "Great ruler," he said softly, "let there be order to our suffering. We will offer one deer each day, willing, calm, so the others may live in peace." The king, amused, agreed. A list was drawn. One deer per day, alternating between herds. No chase, no screams, just quiet death. And so it went. Until one morning, a young doe was chosen. She was from another herd, led by a different chief. But when her turn came, she did not arrive alone. she brought her fawn, still wobbling on its legs, eyes wide, breath quick with fear. The doe knelt before the banyan deer. "I do not come to beg for myself," she said, "but for my child. He cannot feed without me. He cannot yet graze. If I die today, he dies too." She lowered her head. "I ask not for escape, only for time. Let another go in my place, just until he learns to eat." The banyan deer looked at her, then at the fawn, then at the sky, and without a word he turned, walked to the river's edge, and stepped onto the path that led to the palace. The guards, now familiar with his presence, let him pass. The king sat on his marble seat, polishing the tip of his spear. "You again," he said. "What is it now?" The banyan deer bowed low. "I come to take her place." The king raised an eyebrow. "She is not from your herd." "I know." "She is not your responsibility." "She is a mother." The king laughed, then let her king speak for her. "He did not." "And why you?" "Because I can." A silence fell between them. The king studied the deer, the steady breath, the lowered gaze, the quiet strength. "You would give your life for a stranger." "I do not see strangers," said the deer. "Only lives, only suffering, only the chance to spare it." The king leaned back. "Tell me, banyan deer, are you not afraid?" The deer looked up, calm as still water. "I am not afraid to die. I am only afraid to forget compassion." Something shifted in the room, a hush deeper than silence. The king stood, and for the first time in many days, he put down his spear. "No more," he said. "No more blood, no more names drawn, no more quiet lines of sacrifice." He turned to his guards. "Let them go, all of them." That evening, the forest rang with a sound it had not heard in weeks. Joy. Deer ran free beneath the banyan branches. Mothers called their young. The wind moved through the trees without the scent of fear. And at the center of it all stood the banyan deer, watching not with pride, but with peace. In years to come, the king would be remembered as one who changed, not through conquest, but through listening. He had come for mangoes and left with something far sweeter. And the deer who gave up his place without hesitation, he would live on in paintings, in prayers, in stories whispered to children before sleep. Not because he was noble, but because he saw no difference between himself and the one who wept. Because real compassion does not ask, "Is this my problem?" It says, "If it hurts you, it touches me." And in that truth, we are all the same. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.